All right. Hi, everyone. Um, my name is Kyle Barker. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Small Practices Network at the BSA, along with Susie Sanchez. Um, we are really excited today to have Will and Jonathan from the city to talk to us about ADUs and about the city's recent efforts. So we have a few people who are part of the design team on this on the call as well. We have Paul Miller from Neighbor Architects. We have Lee Moreau from Other Tomorrows. Um, we've got Lauren from Neighbor. Just looking around at all the attendees. There's too
We have
many of you, so I'm
Pat,
probably missing a few
Pat
people.
Vigil, I see as well from Other Tomorrows.
There you go. Cool. So we got a lot of people on here. Um, So we're really excited to hear about what the city's been up to with this. So I'm just going to pass it over to Will and Jonathan. And our goal for today is to go through this presentation and then leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. But if you have any questions that pop up as the presentation's going, feel free to just put those in the chat. I'll keep an eye on it. And like I said, we'll also have some time at the end. So um, also, what's just one like culture note for those of you that this is your first time coming to the Small Practices Network meetings. If you feel comfortable leaving your camera on during the presentation, we love to see your faces. There's no pressure on that. So if you're eating or you're self-conscious, that's totally fine. But it's definitely not weird here to leave your camera on. So, all right. Uh, with no further ado, thank you all for coming, and Will and Jonathan, you can take it away.
It is a pleasure to see all your smiling faces on this lovely chilly Thursday. What are we? I guess technically it's afternoon. We are very pleased to be with you all here at the City of Boston. This is one example of a project where the city's had the pleasure of working very closely with the design community, specifically our consultants, but also as we have been talking to a lot, like bouncing the work off a lot of other design professionals as we've been thinking through it, as we think about how to both enable ADUs, accessory dwelling units in the city of Boston, provide information about how to do it, and then think about how that relates to zoning. And so we have two real big pieces today that we're going to talk about. The first is going to be the pending release of our ADU guidebook, which Jonathan Palazzolo, our urban designer and architect here at the City of Boston Planning Department, is going to go through. And then we'll talk about next steps as it relates to zoning, which I'll get into too. So first, just to tee it up a little bit, what is an ADU guidebook and why are we doing it? And the biggest piece, which for those of you who may have heard, statewide, there's been a lot of discussion on ADUs in the last couple of years. And in fact, the most recent Affordable Homes Act passed by the Healing Administration legalizes ADUs from a zoning perspective to be by right in single family zones in every municipality except for Boston. So we have a different way that zoning is enabled through state legislation compared to every other community in the state. And so that sort of enabling of ADUs doesn't apply here. There's a lot of steps that the city of Boston's taken, but more remains to be done. And so even as we think through sort of the legal mechanisms of it, one key piece of it, which we discovered very quickly and which our consultants helped us with immensely, was to that we need to create a document that would provide sort of the guidance, the inspiration, so that architects, homeowners, stakeholders, interested urbanists would have a sense of what an ADU could look like here in the city of Boston compared to a lot of other places where they've been happening more readily, so that as we work towards both zoning reform and just design approval, that we have some sort of common sense of goals and understanding to get through that. So there's really three sets of primary audiences. One is this document, while it's for design professionals, it's not exclusive for design professionals, right? And so we want this to be something which homeowners themselves can interpret, understand, and use as guidance as they think through this process on their own. Just even from the very beginning, is an ADU feasible on my property? We want the answer to usually be yes. But if so, what potential valences could that take? And so it both provides, it shrinks the universe of potential options to what we think is generally feasible. And we hope then that a homeowner can sort of get that first sense of things. It provides an overall sort of flow from beginning to end of how to get from I want to have an ADU to hopefully I have an ADU designed, built and approved on my property. Then we also want this to be useful for designers and contractors who are going to do it. In many cases, you know, especially as we get into more complicated situations, the work of you all, of design professionals, is absolutely critical to actually make these ADUs, make something that isn't currently happening happen. But we want to provide a more constrained set of information so that you're not reinventing this wheel from scratch every single time. And so we hope that this gives you guidance as you think through these kinds of things. And then additionally, for just city government, whether it's other departments in the city, elected officials, people who want to see ADUs happen but don't know how to speak that language of zoning, building code, design, all the rest of it, that there be some sort of more understandable set of information around that as we sort of work towards making this be more feasible and doable as of right. I think many of these things probably resonate with you, but we here in government really get a lot of it, not just various people saying maybe they're kind of into it, but like a lot of, you know, exhortations from interested parties wanting to build an ADU. It's not just a nice to have. In many cases, it's a critical to have. Housing is very expensive here, and there's not enough of it in the city of Boston. And so, be it aging parents, be it young children, or aging, you know, growing to be adult children who are having a hard time finding a place to live, the need for affordable places to live is, you know, that underscored issue of the housing crisis here in the city, and across the country, really. And so this is one tool in the range of tools we have available to us to try to address that. So sometimes it's for having it where you're not wanting to rent it to somebody, but in some cases it's about creating an ADU that you can then use to rent out and generate extra income. We want to achieve all of those ends. So with that in mind, the guidebook really creates a set. We have 12 design schemes that we hope covers the general flavor of the overall set of options that are workable here at the city. And so we've tried to think through what kinds of schemes make sense where. And we tried to go through different sets of lots to make that happen. And so with this in mind, I'm going to pass over to JP, who's going to actually go through the guidebook.
Thanks, Will. So hi, everyone. I just want to linger on this slide a little bit longer because this is an incredibly important part of this project. The city of Boston is an immensely heterogeneous city when it comes to its built form. And we tasked the consultant team, and they rose to the occasion rather painstakingly to try to come up with a design for almost every condition imaginable. Every type of home on every type of lot was sort of their assignment. And that's what we're attempting to represent here with the 12 different designs, so that homeowners and architects and everyone else can imagine an ADU on their specific property in their specific situation. So if we advance to the next slide, the ADU guidebook will also have this diagram to try to help homeowners navigate this. What kind of lot do they live on? What kind of home do they live on? And what do they want out of the ADU? Do they want multiple bedrooms? Do they want a studio? What is it that they're trying to do? And hopefully there's a design that the consultant team came up with that might encapsulate some of those goals and those conditions. So if we go next, we're just going to walk through one of each one of these, but the whole guidebook is broken into 3 sections: the small lots, medium lots, and large lots. And as you can see here, the consultant team drew through many, many, many different scenarios, but we'll just take you through one of each one of them. So if we go to the next, this is, I mean, we're talking about a triple decker, but this is a small lot in a dense part of the city that this happens all over the place, but this might be a place where you don't have enough room on the outside of the building to add a detached unit. So there are still solutions for this. And so the neighbor architects drew through what happens if you split a floor, split a unit, and then all the many design implications, including which of the building codes you're going to use, what are the sprinkler requirements, what are the accessibility requirements, and then try to put in enough technical knowledge for the architectural and the design community to use this as a real tool, but then also just to help homeowners to envision what this might be on their property. So if we go next, they drew through plans and that propose average room sizes and how the rooms connect to each other and what you might do with some of the exterior space outside of the home, because it unlocks opportunities there to start thinking about backyards and side yards and how they might change. So if we go next. And then again, we can't stress this enough, how heterogeneous the city is. We used a triple decker to explain this situation, but there are many, many types of homes on many different types of lots that would be eligible for this type of ADU. So the guidebook always has a spread at the end of each section that just kind of talks through what other homes that might use this type of strategy might look like. Next. And so again, so here we're jumping into the medium part of the city, or the medium lots part of the city. Here you might see ADUs start to take a limited additions outside of the building, or small detached units in back and side yards. So we'll jump to the design here. And this is a fairly common situation. You have a 2-story, likely 2-family unit with a driveway on the side of the house. Maybe that can be turned into a small detached unit or ADU that sits in the side yard. And what are, again, all those implications? What are the sprinkler requirements? What are the fire access requirements? This is an incredibly important part of ADU design. The fire department and the state fire code have very strict requirements on fire access. So this is something the consultant team really worked through and are trying to communicate through the guidebook. If we go next. And then here, so we're seeing the plan. This is where you start to get slightly larger ADUs. Maybe this is a 1-bedroom instead of the studio we looked at before. And it also unlocks a lot of opportunities for the rear yard, the side yard, etc. Next. And then always pairing this with really beautiful visuals so that homeowners can start to envision how this might work for their property and start to see what are the opportunities for them to do on their own homes. Next. And again, we can't stress enough the variety of homes that exist in our city. So really trying to capture all the different types of homes that this type of ADU might work for. Next. And then so the last category, the larger lots of the city, and these are really all over the place. But here you might start to see more detached units in the backyards and side yards, or even rather significant additions. Next. And just looking at a fairly typical lot, with a significant backyard, you can get a really sizable ADU back there. But again, what are the fire access requirements? How do you then start to think about providing privacy between the main home and the new ADU? And so if we go to the next slide, the consultant team started thinking through what are the opportunities for open space? Do you provide gardens? Do you provide new trees that not only align with the sustainability requirements of the city or the sustainability goals of the city, but also provide privacy between new homes? ADUs can start to be larger on these lots. So here we're showing a 2-bedroom unit. It's trying to think through all of these design implications. Next. And just lovely visuals from the consultant team to help homeowners envision themselves in these futures. Next. Next. And then again, I've said it multiple times, the variety is so incredibly important. It was so incredibly important to this project. And then the next stage that Will is going to talk through. And so here, we are hoping to take this, or the guidebook, while we're really excited about it, doesn't actually come with any real zoning changes just yet, where it has informed us on where we want to go. But to that end, we are taking this, we're hoping to take this to the BPDA board for a vote so that it can then serve as recommendations as staff make recommendations to the ZBA board, because unfortunately, without the zoning change, many of these projects are still going to require zoning relief. So by taking this to the board, staff can use this as a basis of recommendations for approvals for projects. And I'm going to hand this back to Will to talk about next steps.
All right, so thank you, JP. And just again, I think the whole consultant team has representatives here. Many thanks to Neighbor Architects for all the beautiful design work, Outwith Studio for the coordination and all the planning work that went into that, Other Tomorrows for taking something which had a lot of beautiful components and turning it into what is truly an amazing document. So thank you. And to the code consultant for actually making sure that this stuff makes sense. That they were all phenomenal. So with that in mind, we think we've scrubbed all the typos. We have a PDF that is almost ready to put on the website. We are waiting to hit go on that, but it will be available on the planning department website starting next week. And we're also putting the spit and polish on an interactive version of it. It'll be like an ArcGIS story map with multiple different components where not 100%, but 80-ish% of the content will be sort of visible as a web page. So that way, even if, as you're thinking through this stuff, if you have a potential client who's not interested in navigating a 100-something page PDF on their phone or whatever, you can send them a web link to help them sort of scroll through it and think through it, Pinterest style. But then even as we're doing that, we'll then have subsets of different parts of the guidebook available. So for every different scheme, if you go to the story map, we'll also have smaller PDFs of each one of these schemes and different subsets. That'll be easier for homeowners to sort of parse through. We're working on getting it printed. Working on getting the city to work on print things has been an interesting experience. I'm fairly new to city government, but we're gonna have at least one copy at every branch of the Boston Public Library soon. Not yet. And we're gonna have more copies that we'll have available. We can't print out copies for everyone because it's a pretty chunky book that we can't just give away totally for free, but we'll have enough to try to get the word out in so many ways. And the biggest thing that we want from you all is, one, use it. This will be your path until we have full zoning relief to like the more you can align your work to what's in this guidebook, it will help streamline the process of getting an ADU through the permitting and zoning process while it still requires zoning relief. And then once we get zoning through, this will still be useful as a way of sort of having some common sense of what the city's looking for in general and things that really should be by right once we solve all of that. And so with that in mind, this is a little bit less done because we have yet to actually start this process, but I do want to give you all some information about where we go from here now that the guidebook is pretty much done, which is on Tuesday, we're gonna have a public meeting. You are welcome to attend, though. You've actually basically seen the majority of the content in abbreviated form here this afternoon, but we're going to be starting a new zoning initiative around neighborhood housing, which is to change the zoning across residential parts of the city to allow for things like ADUs to be built without the need for zoning relief. And so this is a map. We showed it actually back in May, the last time we talked about ADUs at a public meeting, but we didn't really dwell on it. But now that we've really gone through the guidebook, we think this is worth dwelling on. My guess is many of you have done some kind of work at the city of Boston. Even when I was brand new to city planning and design work as a consultant, when I first had an architect explain to me, like, oh yeah, we're working on the refusal set, that did not make sense to me. The idea that you first have to submit things that are wrong, right? Like this is how we all live our lives now. And that's not the way planners often want it to go. And so we finally, well, actually out with Studio, our consultant team did the math. We checked, actually, what does the zoning say can happen? We finally checked. What does the zoning say can happen on different parts of the city of Boston? And the answer is in 99, we rounded down, in 99.7% of cases, just looking at these 4 rules of FAR, unit count, lot size, and yard requirements, which is our silly name for setbacks here at the city, already 99-something% of the city fails to conform. And as you all know, if you're already non-conforming, you can't really do anything else. So the current zoning.
Well, we need to ask them, like, if they have any strong opinions about the kitchen.
That's true. We do need to do that. So this sort of is the task ahead of us. If we want to have a path that allows things like ADUs or different kinds of work, renovating a home, creating a dormer, anything that involves changes to the exterior, this is a gating issue. And so this really has driven a lot of our thinking as we work from here. This is not how cities often are, but it's how we are here in Boston right now. So our goal, in many ways, is a very simple one, but it involves a fair amount of work, which is why we're excited about this initiative. We want to enable renovation and construction at a smaller scale. Right now, sort of, if you have to go through the ZBA process, that is a lot of work. And so it only becomes worthwhile to do it when sort of the outcome is commensurate with the amount of design work and regulatory process. And so our goal is to allow for things that otherwise seem prohibitive or overly arduous to happen in a more reasonable kind of way across the city, right? We want it to be that you can add a dormer without having to get letters from every one of your neighbors or to go through multiple years of ZBA stuff and wait for the various refusal sets and everything else. We want to enable fixing your porch up. We want to enable adding a unit onto your property via an ADU or other kinds of changes. And so, one thing which we hear a lot throughout most of our planning processes, throughout almost all of our engagement, is people say it just doesn't seem like anything's getting built that feels like the city that we know and love. And that, well, the answer is yes. That's what the zoning currently says. And so our goal is to line those two things up a little bit better. Our interest in ADUs has been strong. I mean, it's a funny thing because there aren't that many ADUs. And so it's hard for people to be like, yeah, I built an ADU. It was hard, but we got it done. Like there aren't that many of those. But even after we had our initial kickoff of, this work on the guidebook and a meeting, 8 months ago, immediately following that, we just had a very simple survey. And we just said, if you're interested in ADU and you attended this, like, let us know. And within 2 or 3 days, we had hundreds of responses, most emphatically in support, even for something which isn't currently permissible here in the city. And we saw that interest all across neighborhoods all across the city. And so many of these neighborhoods are the places where we want to do some of our initial focus as we think through this zoning. As we were saying at the very top, it's young families moving, it's people who want to stay, and it's people who want to just fix things up and be able to stay in the house that served them well for so many years. Some of you may have heard, and this depends on the degree to which you follow the ins and outs of Boston zoning politics, which for the love of you all, I hope is not too many in some sense, but professionally, no, probably has to be. We've been working on enabling ADUs for what seems like my entire, well, I haven't only worked here since 2017, but for a lot of my professional career here in the greater Boston area. We've progressively, since 2017, at the City of Boston, enabled ADUs a little bit more over and over and over. And each one of these steps are great. I want to refer, this has been a huge amount of work to get here to date. But, this talking heads quote does seem very apropos. I hope it makes it into the final public meeting next week. How did we get here? How, after all these years of doing this, have we permitted, not even built, have we permitted fewer than 200 ADUs across the city, a city of, 700 something thousand people. So our goal is to get from the pilot to the zoning, to actually have it be as of right. And so that's our task in this first phase. And where we're going to focus is this idea of, in the coming year, to update residential zoning in parts of the city where lots are larger. We have an aim to do it across the entire city, but as we just saw from all the nonconformity, there's a lot of work to do there. And so our task right now is to basically build upon what's happened in Mattapan. And many of you probably were familiar with the zoning which changed in Mattapan, which is just one neighborhood here in the city of Boston. But a couple months ago, we updated zoning in the neighborhood of Mattapan. So now the residential zoning is not entirely, but almost entirely in most districts rewritten into sort of residential 1 and residential 2 zones, which is totally different from the way it is in most other neighborhood articles in the city. And ADUs are allowed as of right in Mattapan. And so one of the main outcomes of Plan Mattapan, which, was led by Mass Design Group in partnership with the city, was to enable ADUs for all the reasons that we've talked about ad nauseum. And we achieved that. And so in many ways, the work of Mattapan is what we want to expand to other neighborhoods that have similar urban characteristics in terms of lot size and dimensional regulations to Mattapan. And that's sort of the first step of where we're going from here. So we're taking the lessons from Mattapan, the lessons from allowing some versions of ADUs across the city, and we want to apply that next. And it's just worth saying the real point of Mattapan zoning is for everyone who's had to deal with refusal sets and everywhere that isn't Mattapan as of 3 months ago, there's all the restrictions that are currently in City of Boston neighborhood zoning. You've got lot sizes that are misaligned, let's call it, with the actual lot sizes in those neighborhoods, FAR that serves as additional constraints, parking requirements, rear yard changes, like every one of the dimensional things which you usually get hit with in a refusal set. What we tried to do in Mattapan was actually both conform the existing urban fabric and allow for flexible change and growth. And so we now have a lot of things which serve us very, very well. For instance, we changed side yard requirements to be cumulative, which is to say, instead of requiring that you have your lot in the middle, well, one, right now we have in most neighborhoods that the side yards are too big for the actual existing side yard, so you never actually make it. But in addition to that, because they're so big, we then expect that the building be perfectly centered on every single lot, which is not how things are in the city of Boston. And so what we switched it to is a cumulative side yard, so that you just have to get a certain amount on either side, which is how pretty much every building here in the city is. And so a large number of these changes are what we then implemented first in Mattapan, also in squares and street zoning, which we're actively working on mapping, and what we want to now bring to residential districts across the city of Boston. So again, Mattapan is a very specific case. We have very different scales of development in different parts of the city, but the point is that now you can build more, and they can also be ADUs in Mattapan. And so we want to generalize this idea, which is in the Mattapan zoning, to other places as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen because we're already halfway through, and I know we all are busy with our days. I'm happy to answer me and JP and or the rest of the consultant team. We are more than happy to answer questions for those of you who have it, or just hear your feedback. This should be up on the planning department's website by early next week.
Thank you for that great presentation. While people are thinking of their questions, which again, you can either just unmute and go for it, or you can put them in the chat. I was just going to say, yeah, thank you. That was incredibly illuminating and such a tremendous amount of work. Just thinking about all the variables and all the different possibilities is like a little overwhelming. So hats off to you all and the consultant team. I was going to ask, so to that last bit about the zoning. So I know that's a little unknowable when that will change, and it seems like you were projecting changes in the city, hopefully by like 2026. I was wondering what we as architects can do to help push that along.
That's an excellent question. I bet JP will have his own version of it too, but I'll start, which is I know you're all too busy. To the degree you have time, we would love okay, sorry, let me take a step back. We did this some with squares and streets. It is critical that we are going to have to do outreach both to the BSA and other design professionals to get feedback on these things as we're working through it. It would be, I mean, JP is a great architect, you know, but like we can't just have the architects at it's not an ivory tower, at the cement tower of City Hall coming up with the dimensional constraints and calling it a day. And so we're going to sort of need your help to kick the tires, so to speak, as we think through this, because this is a meaningful change across large parts of the city. So your involvement in that is critical. And the other piece of it is we also need your help in communicating this to everyone who you work with. It's a process that's only just now starting, and we can only do so well. We have many megaphones here at the city, but our megaphones only reach in certain directions. And so the degree you're able to find other stakeholders, be involved, and help this process, the more we can have people actively helping us think through the zoning, the more likely it is that we're going to sort of see success in an expeditious kind of manner. That's answer number one. JP might want to follow up on that.
I mean, I think I have a very similar answer actually, but it's not just telling your colleagues, it's telling your neighbors, telling everyone, because we do need support as we go back out into the public meetings, as we start to engage the community. We need all voices to be heard and all voices to show up to be able to have a productive conversation as a city. So tell everyone you know, basically.
I have a question kind of on financials or like economic impact. I think I had heard things that there were restrictions that it couldn't be rental or it had to be owner occupied, or I'm just kind of trying to think. I live in South Boston, so it's very contentious with neighbors. So I'm hearing pitchforks and tomatoes for light, air, privacy, parking, density, all the huge. But I'm also wondering, do you think there could be any negative effect of developers or landlords say, yippee, like now I could buy this single family home and add this as of right rental unit, so it could actually make possibly more units, which is good, but less affordable, or just, so I guess it's kind of it's kind of two questions. Are there any restrictions on rental owner? Is it going to be as of right for not an owner occupier to get it approved? And do you think there could be some detrimental financial impact that we're not thinking of?
I can give it a shot. So right now, ADUs are legal, assuming you touch nothing on the exterior of your building. So if you have a basement that somehow has 2 means of egress and otherwise solves all its building code problems, you can build an ADU without needing zoning relief. That's a big step. Almost no one's able to actually meet those needs. They usually need a little bit of zoning relief. But right now, those ADUs, the rule is in Boston zoning that those ADUs, as ADUs, have to be, the building has to be owner occupied to be able to have an ADU. At the moment, we don't have an active plan to change that requirement, but all of the considerations you said are well known. The Affordable Homes Act is the state law everywhere except for Boston disallows owner occupancy requirements. Most states have allowed ADUs statewide, California, I think New Hampshire and Vermont, although I could be wrong about one of those two, but at least one other New England state disallows owner occupancy requirements. So that's something that is a question we're going to have to think about as we work through the zoning change. So that's not an answer, but it's kind of an answer. But then to your broader one about financial impacts, that's the task of the zoning, which is an outcome of a non-goal of this project is to then change the zoning such that it becomes the goal to tear down and rebuild every single residential property in the city of Boston. That is not our goal, right? Our goal is actually to do something which is currently it's hard to imagine. This is why it's hard. This is why it's hard to imagine. We want to actually make it easy to make incremental changes to a property. That's not a thing which we currently allow in the zoning right now. Like usually it's easy, like unless you really like your house, if there's like a serious amount of changes you need to make to it, it might be the calculation that you just sell it to somebody who then redevelops it, flips it, and goes through all the burden of variances and other kinds of things. And so I would actually say that the point of this is very much to allow a path for the lower cost kind of maintenance and incremental changes to allow something which isn't currently allowed. That wasn't a full sentence, but I hope my thought made it all the way through. To the degree that's a concern, that's where we need your help to help us tailor this so that the areas where we're changing the zoning in this kind of way allow for that more flexible basic kind of maintenance and smaller development, while things like squares and street zoning are where we have more transformative change, which is really the point of those initiatives, which are complementary to, but very much distinct from this. Does that make sense?
I was going to say, I didn't see them at the beginning of the call, so I just wanted to call out a few other members of the consultant team. We have Esty Shapiro and June McCartan from Outwith and Sarah Dunbar from Neighbor. To what you were just saying, Will, one of the other questions I had, and actually something that's just fun to share maybe with this group. So Providence is implementing something called parent permits, where you can go to the city and say, we want to build this type of building many times. And then you just come back later with child permits to say, this is how this one is different from what you've already approved. And so I think that model is really interesting. And obviously we have the zoning barrier to get out of the way first. So I'm not trying to get too far ahead, but I am curious if the city has thought about having, these seem like very thoughtful designs by the Neighbor team, but I'm curious if there's been consideration around having essentially like a parent permit of several different types of ADUs that the city has kind of reviewed in a high level, and then could just kind of hone in on specifics, because it does seem like one of the most challenging things currently, really development everywhere, but maybe especially in Boston, is just the time and the risk of the approvals process.
Yeah. How about I give you the Boston flavor that we have as of today for what you just said. The first is there's much regulatory work to be done. If I could confidently tell you what the end outcome of like the cleaned regulatory process for all this is in a couple of years, I probably wouldn't be working in urban planning. I would do something very lucrative. But we're taking steps that are in the same spirit of that. the idea of getting approval of this, it's not a permit, but it is a clear policy definition from the city of what we want to see. And so that our hope is that that allows, even in advance of zoning relief, that as the process of trying to get a permit for things that resemble what's in the guidebook are happening, that we're able to find a faster way to get that from start to finish. We're still shaping up exactly how that looks. There's already sort of permits that go with different kinds of speeds. There's our ability to sort of provide clean recommendations that are more predictable. And so we have many things in the works right now, although I don't have anything definitive to tell you there. But the sort of flip side to that is because of fire requirements, because of sprinkler requirements, there's already, I see some comments in the chat about the complications when eventually, depending on what you add, it can cause the need to sprinkler large amounts of things. We are fairly confident that the sort of attached, internal/attached side of the spectrum is a solution, or solutions that are going to be much more usable in most lots across the city. You have to, as the guidebook shows, you have to not only have enough space in your backyard, enough space for fire access, but also like just clear space in your side yard that isn't a driveway, that isn't something which is blocked, to get an approvable fully detached unit in your backyard. And so the flip to that is being able to pre-approve something which is going to be very building dependent is kind of a tricky problem. And so that's one of our tasks as we think through this. And that's part of why sort of starting with zoning is a step in the first place, because if we can make it so that attached ADUs, or the kinds of improvements that lead to an attached ADU, but might just be about maintenance of a unit, if we can get those things to be as of right, then that permitting process should by definition be much more streamlined than it currently is. So we hope
Right.
zoning gets us a long way there.
One small thing to add, just to Kyle's comment, is that we also were looking at a lot of the permitted ADUs, or ones that were denied for specific reasons. So trying to pull lessons learned from those into the designs. So in a way, it's a little bit learning that lesson.
Chris had that question in the chat, which it seems like was also answered in the chat, which was about sprinklers. Jillian, Jillian, I'm happy to read your question, or actually you just unmuted, so if you would like to.
Sorry, yeah, I was a little bit loud over here. I was curious more about historic requirements in many of our historic districts around Boston. I do a lot more work on the in other neighborhoods, not specific to Boston, but I'm interested in it. So I was curious what kind of resources might be available for those who are interested in doing an addition for an ADU or a detached.
I think in most places where you have sort of formal landmarked designations, those kinds of historic districts, that's probably going to be where the smaller lots are the kind of condition you're in. Also, the idea that this sort of smaller lot interventions, that first set of things in the guidebook, are going to be ones that have a less noticeable impact on the public realm. In fact, that very first one that JP showed, the sort of perspective from the street of a split unit in a triple decker, that's kind of a funny one because it just looks like a triple decker. That's actually one where the public realm impact is zero. And so to the degree landmark requirements are going to play a part in this, guidance to help think about ADUs that fit into the requirements of that are going to be key. We're not in this initiative, part of why we're thinking about the large lots is there's many different aspects of zoning which play different kinds of restrictive roles. The relationship of things like redevelopment and improvement on landmark properties is a broader kind of question around how we think about zoning here in the city, but we're not, actively seeking to change that right now. One thing that is worth noting is more commonly comes up is this thing about a neighborhood design overlay district, the NDODs. The main piece there, and that's sort of separate from the actual zoning district you're in. Those are overlays in Boston zoning. It's that if you do things that, this is to oversimplify, that like are more or less visible from the street, that touch things like the outside of the building or the roof, then you go through design review. And so that is still, that is in effect. That's what the overlay does. And so there's probably a spectrum of as of rightness that we're talking about as we think through these districts, where maybe the base sort of variance-ness is something we're seeking to alleviate, but the role of design review as it relates to other parts of the city is obviously a much more complicated question. That was a non-answer, but I hope I answered it.
Yes, thank you. Just one comment there. I feel like it's that's one of the biggest challenges that when we're working in these historic landmark properties, you know, you have a review board that's pushing for one particular image of, you know, this property type, and it's facing that challenge of trying to encourage more density in these neighborhoods can be that's one of the bigger hurdles, I feel like, in a lot of specific neighborhoods. So appreciate your perspective.
Has very heard. I guess just the one comment to that, which is what we do here on the 9th floor, is we often have many overlapping policy goals, some of which conflict with one another. And so that's the task of these initiatives, is to find a way that achieves the best outcome to further as many of those as possible. And so we'll figure it out.
We had a question earlier, or I was getting some private messages about this recording being posted. And when I joined before this call was launched for everyone else, you and Sai were talking about this being posted after an upcoming meeting. And so maybe could you just speak to the date on that, and then I can.
Absolutely. So
yeah.
At 7 p.m. or is it 6? It's 6. It's 6 p.m. Maybe it's 7. I don't remember. It's either at 6 or 7. It's on the Boston Planning Department's website. We're having a public meeting on November 19th. It'll be the sort of public launch of this guidebook with more or less a similar presentation with maybe a little bit more detail, both going through the guidebook and giving some information about the upcoming zoning initiative. At that point, this information is public. And so by then we should have the actual PDF and story map of the guidebook available. And, you know, within a day or two of that, a very similar presentation will be on the planning department's website. And so the BSA at our request is going to wait a few days at least to post this, just so that the public meeting is sort of where it makes its formal presence on the internet. Not that we don't like giving people scoops, but our plan is to try to have our own meeting be the piece of it there. But you're welcome to attend, although I think you know much of the information. So were you to want to attend, it would be more to hear the flavor of conversation and Q&A, because you basically saw it today. The day after that, we're also having a meeting on the Mayor's Office of Housing, formerly known as D&D, is having a meeting in person at the Mattahunt School in Mattapan to discuss their work on additional financing options for ADUs as well. And so there's sort of many irons in this fire of trying to figure out how to better enable this work. So that's another thing which is happening next week.
I have a comment and
Thank you.
a question, actually. First of all, I want to commend you on the zoning changes. That's really, I'm an architect. I've done a couple ADUs, and it's something that's really much needed as far as the zoning. And then as far as the what you have created now, which is really nice and helpful, but with the integration of the zoning, I would imagine that the package will have to get updated at some point if the zoning doesn't go through or such, because right now it's sort of best practice, right? As far as the zoning is concerned, is that?
That's 80%. I would frame it slightly differently, which is
Okay.
This guidebook does not presuppose the zoning relief. This is a book for today. This is, no matter what the slog of the appeals process is, these are the practices that the city of Boston wants to see when it comes to ADUs. This is also serving as a goalpost of sorts as we think through what the new zoning should be, these are the kinds of ADUs we need to know. We need to make sure are enabled through that process. And so, in many ways, this was a necessary but not sufficient step to achieve zoning, so that we don't just come up with a bunch of random dimensional constraints that don't actually achieve the end. So we know we need to sort of work on conforming existing properties, but also allow the flexibility to see these kinds of generally architecture, building code and fire code appropriate interventions also happening. So this is helping us know, whatever the Wayne Gretzky quote is, this is helping us know where the puck's going to be.
Right. Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions?
I just put my email in the chat. You should all feel free to email me. I may pass you off to people who are more informed than me, but me and another person she's on vacation. She is thankfully on vacation this week with a well-deserved one. Andrea Baena, she and I are the two planners, which are really going to be leading this ADU zoning effort through at least its first phase. And so you can email me with any questions. And part of our job is to make sure that you have all the tools you need to try to make this happen. We're sort of plugging away at the zoning piece of it, but even in advance of that, we want to guide you as you're thinking through your architectural journeys.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Will and Jonathan, for your time, and thank you to the whole consultant team for joining and for all the work on this. I feel like this was super informative, and we'll look forward to posting the recording when the time comes. And thank you all for attending. It was a great session, and we'll see you next month.